Blood ran slowly down Darius Holloway's face as the officer pressed his knee harder. "Please, my children are watching," Darius whispered. The officer smiled with contempt, never noticing that the governor's security team was already closing in with weapons drawn. Sometimes power hides in plain sight, and on this day, Officer Grant Harlan would learn that lesson in the most brutal way possible. Before we dive into this shocking true story of racial injustice, tell me in the comments below where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you want more stories about racial justice and the fight against discrimination in America. Now let us discover how a simple drive to a school event became a national controversy that would change the way policing was done forever. Governor Darius Holloway woke as sunlight filtered through the curtains of his home in Atlanta. The weight of his responsibilities slipped away for a moment while he watched his wife Elise sleeping peacefully beside him. In his years of service, Darius had achieved what many would have thought impossible for a black man from southern Georgia. Yet the long road had carved lines of quiet determination into his face. He slipped silently from the bed, careful not to wake Elise, as memories of his childhood drifted through his mind. He remembered a small apartment where his single mother returned exhausted after working 3 different jobs just to keep food on the table. She had instilled in him the values that carried him through every chapter of his life: perseverance, dignity, and an unshakable belief that education could open any door. Darius walked barefoot down the hallway of the governor's mansion and paused at the doorway of his twins' rooms. Malik and Zara still slept, their faces peaceful and untouched by the harsh realities Darius had faced growing up. Even after becoming the first black governor of Georgia, he sometimes could not believe how far he had come, from community organizer to state senator, and finally to the highest office in the state. I went downstairs to the kitchen and started the coffee himself. Even though staff could have done it, he preferred these small, ordinary moments, reminders of the life he had lived before politics. When Elise entered the kitchen a short while later, already dressed in her professional attire as director of a prominent nonprofit, she found Darius reading briefing reports at the kitchen island. "You promised you wouldn't work today," she said, her voice carrying a gentle reprimand as she poured herself coffee. Darius smiled apologetically and set the papers aside. "Force of habit," he admitted. "But I am committed to being present at the science fair. The children have worked too hard on their renewable energy project for me to miss it." Elise's expression softened as she sat beside him and placed her hand over his. "They will be so happy to have you there. It means everything to them when you can just be their dad, not the governor." Their conversation was interrupted by the twins bursting into the kitchen with energy, already arguing good-naturedly about some detail of their presentation. "Dad, tell Malik that the solar panel has to face south for maximum efficiency," Zara insisted, her intelligent eyes, so much like her mother's, shining with determination. Before Darius could answer, Malik shot back. "But I say we should mention that tracking systems can adjust the angle throughout the day." Darius laughed and raised his hands in surrender. "You're both right, and your project is going to leave everyone impressed." While the family ate breakfast together, Darius made a decision. "I think we'll take the Lexus today instead of the official car." Elise raised an eyebrow. "Without the security team?" Darius shook his head. "They'll follow discreetly. But just for today, I want us to feel normal." His phone rang and he glanced at it with a sigh. "It's the lieutenant governor," he told Elise before answering. "Sophia, good morning." The voice of Lieutenant Governor Sophia Reyes came through, apologetic but firm. "Darius, the legislative leaders are requesting an emergency meeting on the budget allocation. They're already all here." Darius pinched the bridge of his nose. "Sophia, we talked about this yesterday. Today is my day with the family. The only day this month I've blocked completely. I have full confidence in you to handle it." After ending the call, he met Elise's worried gaze. "It's all right," he reassured her. "Sophia is more than capable." But the call had reminded him of the constant challenges he faced as a black governor in a state still wrestling with its complicated racial history. Only recently his office had received another batch of death threats after he pushed for a monument honoring civil rights leaders. His security team had intercepted a package containing racist images. Even among some political colleagues, subtle racism showed in their surprise at his eloquence. or in backhanded compliments about him being different from what they expected. As the family prepared to leave, Darius turned on the local news and briefly noticed reports of planned protests against police brutality after another unarmed black man had been shot during a traffic stop in a neighboring county. Across the city, Officer Grant Harlan sat through the morning briefing at the 6th Precinct of the Atlanta Police Department, barely containing his contempt while Captain Naomi Brooks, a black woman in her late 40s, emphasized community relations. "Remember, every interaction is an opportunity to build trust," Captain Brooks said, her gaze lingering on Harlan. Harlan had been on the force for years and privately resented what he called the new soft approach to policing. When the meeting ended, he muttered to his partner, Officer Mateo Rivera, "Another lesson on special treatment for certain neighborhoods." Captain Brooks overheard and called him back. "Officer Harlan, this is your third complaint this quarter for excessive force during routine stops," she said, sliding a file across her desk. "All of them involve minority citizens." Harlan straightened defensively. "Those complaints were unfounded, ma'am. The suspects were non-compliant." Captain Brooks leaned forward. "There's a pattern here that concerns me. You're walking on thin ice, Harlan. One more incident and you'll face suspension and a review." Harlan nodded stiffly, but as he left the office, he made no effort to hide his disdain. In the locker room, he complained loudly to other officers. "We can't even do our jobs anymore without them crying racism." Most officers ignored him, but one rookie named Cole Brennan seemed to hang on every word. "You'll see," Harlan told Brennan as they headed to their patrol car. "Sometimes you have to show them who's in charge from the start, or they'll never respect the badge." As Harlan and Brennan began their patrol through an affluent area bordering some of Atlanta's historically black neighborhoods, neither could imagine how decisively their path would cross that day with the governors, or how that encounter would change their lives forever. The black Lexus sedan pulled out of the driveway of the governor's mansion. Darius Holloway was behind the wheel, feeling an unusual sense of freedom. The security SUV followed at a discreet distance, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. It was a compromise Darius had made with his head of security and with his wife Elise, who sat beside him checking her phone in case any work emergency arose. "This feels good," Darius said, looking at her with a smile that erased the gravity of his office and replaced it with the warmth of the young man who had won her heart years earlier at Morehouse College. In the back seat, the twins were absorbed in last-minute preparations for their presentation, papers and notes spread between them, despite Elise's earlier insistence that they relax. "We're going to crush this," Malik said with confidence to his sister, who nodded without looking up from her meticulously prepared note cards. "Mr. Langford already told me our renewable energy station is the most advanced project in the whole 7th grade, Zara replied, referring to their science teacher. Darius listened to their chatter with pride as he drove the familiar streets of Atlanta, the city he had first arrived in as a scholarship student and now governed as part of his state responsibilities. The freedom of driving himself was a rarity he treasured, since most days meant being shuttled from one official event to another. The family conversation flowed naturally, touching on everything from the upcoming weekend movie night to whether they should get a dog. A long-running debate in the Holloway household that Darius suspected the twins would eventually win. "Dad, can we stop for milkshakes after the fair?" Malik asked, looking up from his notes for a moment. Darius glanced at the dashboard clock. "If you both do well, absolutely. I've cleared my schedule until late this afternoon." The promise of uninterrupted family time was rare enough that both children visibly brightened as they entered a stretch of road near their private school. Darius became absorbed in Elise's story about a breakthrough in funding for her nonprofit's literacy program. His foot pressed a little harder on the accelerator as they moved along the wide, tree-lined avenue. The speedometer climbed slowly past the posted limit. The slight excess went unnoticed by Darius until flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror. Officer Grant Harlan had been parked in a surveillance position when the black Lexus passed in front of him, and something about the vehicle caught his attention. Maybe it was the expensive model in that particular neighborhood, or maybe it was simply that the driver was a black man. Either way, Harlan decided to run the plate before pulling out to follow. He radioed the number but grew impatient, waiting for dispatch to respond with the vehicle information. "Possible stolen vehicle. I'm going to investigate," he told his rookie partner Brennan. ignoring the younger man's reminder that they should wait for the registration check to be completed. Harlan activated the lights and siren of the patrol car and accelerated to catch the Lexus. Inside the governor's car, Darius noticed the police lights immediately and felt a familiar knot form in his stomach, a visceral reaction born from a lifetime of experiences in which the color of his skin had turned routine interactions with law enforcement into potentially dangerous situations. "Dad, why is the police stopping us?" Zara asked, her voice suddenly small with anxiety. Darius slowed carefully, using his turn signal properly as he pulled over in a visible public area where several pedestrians were walking. "I was going a little fast, Princess," he explained calmly, though he knew from experience that the minor speeding might not be the real reason for the stop. "There's nothing to worry about. Everyone stay calm and let me handle this." He turned to his wife, whose expression mirrored his own concern. Elise reached back to reassure the children while Darius placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel, a precaution he had learned from his father and had had to teach painfully to his own son not long before. "Malik, Zara, remember what we've talked about," Elise said quietly. "When there's police nearby, we stay especially still and quiet, okay?" Darius felt a pang of sadness knowing his children needed that kind of instruction, but he pushed the feeling aside as the patrol car stopped behind them. Through the side mirror, Darius watched Officer Harlan approach, noting with concern that the officer's hand already rested on his weapon, despite this being a routine traffic stop. Darius discreetly pressed the record button on his phone mounted on the dashboard, another habit born of necessity. "License and registration," Harlan demanded as soon as he reached the driver's window, his tone unnecessarily aggressive. Darius nodded politely. "Good morning, officer. My license is in my wallet and the registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them slowly if that's all right with you." Harlan did not acknowledge the courtesy, his eyes scanning the interior of the vehicle and lingering with suspicion on the expensive watch on Darius's wrist. "Just hurry up," he snapped. Darius removed his license with deliberate slowness and asked Elise to retrieve the registration, narrating his movements clearly. "My wife is opening the glove compartment now to get the registration." Harlan snatched the documents from Darius's hand, studying the license with growing skepticism. The name Darius Holloway clearly meant nothing to him, and he narrowed his eyes at the exclusive address. "Is this your car?" he asked, the question carrying an implicit accusation. "Yes, officer, it is," Darius answered calmly. "Is there a problem?" Harlan ignored the question, staring at Darius's identification with open suspicion. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," he ordered suddenly. Darius felt Elise tense beside him. "May I ask why, officer?" "I was only going a few miles over the limit." Harlan's hand moved more deliberately toward his weapon. "I said step out of the vehicle right now." Darius looked at his frightened children in the rearview mirror, then at his wife. "It's all right," he told them quietly. "Everything is going to be fine." He opened the door slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and his hands visible at all times. When Darius stepped out, Harlan immediately invaded his personal space, an intimidation tactic that revealed his true intentions. "We've received reports of stolen vehicles matching this description," Harlan claimed, though no such report had been filed. Rookie Officer Brennan remained near the patrol car, visibly uncomfortable but saying nothing. "Officer, there must be some mistake," Darius began, his voice steady and respectful despite the treatment. "This is my personal vehicle and all the documentation is in order." Harlan cut him off. "You expect me to believe someone like you owns a car like this?" The racist implication hung in the air as Harlan spotted the security SUV that had stopped a short distance down the street. "Who are those people? You've got friends waiting?" he demanded, his hand now fully on his weapon. "Officer," Darius said with dignity, "I am the governor of this state. That is my security detail. If you handle this properly, your dispatch will confirm my identity." Harlan's face twisted between disbelief and fury. "Sure, and I'm the president," he sneered. "Put your hands on the hood. Inside the car." Elise had taken out her own phone and was calling the governor's chief of staff while trying to comfort the children, who were already crying. "What's happening to Dad?" Zara sobbed as Harlan roughly shoved Darius against the vehicle. Through the windshield, Darius caught the terrified expression on his son's face, and in that moment made a decision not to resist in any way, knowing that the safety and psychological well-being of his children depended on the encounter ending without violence. "Officer Harlan," Darius read from the name on the badge, his voice still calm despite having his cheek pressed against the cold metal of the car. "You are making a serious mistake. Please check your computer or call your supervisor." But Harlan was no longer willing to listen, convinced he had caught someone in the middle of a deception. "Shut up and spread your legs," he ordered, beginning an unnecessarily rough search, while the first passers-by slowed and watched the disturbing scene unfolding before them. Several already held up their phones to record what was clearly becoming a racially charged incident in broad daylight on an Atlanta street. The asphalt burned against Darius Holloway's cheek as Officer Harlan pressed him harder against the hood of the Lexus, the handcuffs digging painfully into his wrists. Despite offering no resistance, the growing crowd formed a semicircle of shocked faces and recording phones. Their presence served as both witness to the injustice and the only protection Darius had against what might happen without observers. "I have children in the car," Darius said through gritted teeth, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. "Please, they're frightened." Harlan responded by twisting Darius's arms higher behind his back, making him gasp in pain. "You should have thought of that before stealing this car and trying to pass yourself off as a government official." The officer growled loudly enough for the onlookers to hear the accusation. Inside the vehicle, Elise desperately tried to shield the twins from witnessing their father's mistreatment while speaking urgently into the phone. "Yes, this is Elise Holloway, the governor's wife," she insisted to the emergency operator. "An officer named Harlan has my husband handcuffed against the hood of our car. Our children are watching everything." Malik had unbuckled his seatbelt, ready to run to his father's defense, but Elise's firm hand on his shoulder kept him in place. "Stay in the car," she ordered, her voice cracking slightly. "Dad needs us to be safe right now." Zara had curled into a tight ball, her science fair notes forgotten on the floor as she sobbed silently. The security team that had been following discreetly was now making frantic calls, caught in the professional dilemma of needing to protect the governor while avoiding an armed confrontation with police that could dangerously escalate the situation. As Harlan roughly searched Darius's pockets, he pulled out a wallet containing not only the governor's official identification, but also his state security credentials. For a moment, doubt crossed Harlan's face, quickly replaced by hardened suspicion. "Pretty elaborate fake IDs," he commented, pocketing them instead of acknowledging their authenticity. The crowd had grown and several people were shouting at Harlan to stop his violent treatment. "He's not resisting. Why is he in handcuffs?" yelled a woman with her phone held high, capturing every moment. "Mind your own business," Harlan snapped, his face flushed with anger at having his authority challenged in public. While Darius endured the public humiliation, his mind returned to the first time he had been a victim of racial profiling as a teenager. Pulled over while driving his mother's old car, forced to sit on the curb for an hour while officers searched the vehicle for drugs that did not exist. He remembered being stopped and frisked in college while walking back to his dorm with textbooks, and that time as a young lawyer when security followed him through a luxury department store. Each incident had been a painful reminder that his achievements and character could be instantly nullified by the color of his skin. Now, as the highest-ranking elected official in the state, he was experiencing the same degradation, but with his children watching, a new level of pain he had hoped they would never have to live. "My name is Governor Darius Holloway," he declared again, his voice carrying the natural authority that had helped him win the election. "Can you verify that with your superior officer or by calling the governor's office?" Harlan leaned in close, lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for Darius. "Listen, good boy. I don't care who you think you are. You people are always trying to be something you're not." The racial insult struck Darius like a physical blow, but he maintained his composure, aware that the growing number of cameras would capture any reaction. The situation intensified when Elise finally stepped out of the car, unable to remain passive any longer. "I am Dr. Elise Holloway," she announced firmly, making clear both her role as First Lady and her professional stature as a neurologist, evident in her bearing. "You are assaulting the governor of Georgia, and I demand that you remove those handcuffs immediately." Harlan turned toward her, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. "Get back in the vehicle, ma'am, or you will be arrested for interfering with a police procedure." The threat against his wife produced the first visible sign of anger on Darius's face. "Officer, do not threaten my wife," he said in a voice that carried a warning despite his vulnerable position. "Your body camera is recording everything, and so are 20 bystanders. This has gone too far." For the first time, uncertainty crossed Harlan's face as he became fully aware of the crowd documenting every one of his actions. His rookie partner Brennan finally approached after correctly verifying the vehicle's registration in the system. "Sir," Brennan said quietly to Harlan, "the vehicle is registered to the governor's office as a personal vehicle. I think we should call the captain." Harlan hesitated, caught between his pride and the growing certainty that he might have made a catastrophic mistake. At that moment, a second patrol car arrived, and Officer Victor Lang, a veteran with 2 decades of service, stepped out immediately, recognizing Darius despite his compromised situation. "Governor Holloway!" he exclaimed in shock, hurrying toward him. "What the hell is going on here?" Harlan stepped back defensively. "This suspect was speeding and presented suspicious identification," he began to explain in a voice that sounded hollow even to himself. Lang looked at the handcuffed governor and then at Harlan with disbelief. "You're out of your mind, Harlan. This is Governor Holloway." Without waiting for permission, Lang hurried to free Darius from the handcuffs, apologizing profusely. "Governor, sir, I am deeply sorry for this misunderstanding." As Darius straightened, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had left red, inflamed marks, he maintained the dignity that had characterized his public service. Instead of showing anger, he went immediately to the car to comfort his children, who were watching the scene with wide, tear-filled eyes. "It's all right now," he assured them, opening the rear door. "Dad's okay." But the damage was already visible in their expressions, a loss of innocence that could never be recovered. Their father, the most powerful man in the state, had been rendered powerless by the color of his skin. Have you ever witnessed racial profiling firsthand? Comment with the number 1 if you believe what Officer Harlan did was motivated by racism, or with the number 2 if you think it was simply a case of mistaken identity. Hit like on this video if you believe that even people in positions of power are not immune to racial discrimination in America. Subscribe to follow what happens next in this shocking true story. Now, with the governor finally freed from the handcuffs, what consequences would Officer Harlan face for his actions? And how would this incident affect not only the Holloway family but policing across the entire state? Keep watching to discover how a routine traffic stop became national news within hours. The next stretch of time unfolded like a surreal nightmare as Captain Naomi Brooks arrived on the scene. Her patrol car screeched to a stop in the middle of what had already become a full-blown crisis. Her face registered first shock, then horror, as she took in the sight of Governor Darius Holloway standing beside his vehicle, suit jacket removed, dress shirt torn and stained with dirt, and a thin trickle of blood drying on his cheekbone where Harlan had pressed him against the car. "Governor Holloway!" she exclaimed with a gasp, advancing quickly while casting a scorching look at Officer Harlan, who stood awkwardly to the side, finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of his error. "Sir, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this inconceivable situation." Darius nodded in acknowledgement, but his attention remained fixed on his family, especially his children, whose wide eyes reflected a new understanding of the world, one he had hoped to shield them from for a while longer. "My primary concern right now is my family," Darius said, his voice steady despite everything that had occurred. Captain Brooks nodded and turned to give firm orders, establishing a perimeter as the crowd had grown to more than 50 people, many still recording everything on their phones. Social media was already exploding with videos of the incident. Some clips showing Harlan's most aggressive moments were already accumulating hundreds of thousands of views. Harlan, now aware that his career hung by a thread, approached Darius with what appeared to be an attempt at an apology, though his body language suggested he was being forced into it. "Governor, I apologize for the misunderstanding," he said stiffly, avoiding eye contact. "If your identification had been clearer, this wouldn't have happened." The non-apology, which actually tried to shift the blame, caused several onlookers to gasp audibly. Darius fixed Harlan with a steady gaze that made the officer shift uncomfortably. "Officer Harlan, there was no misunderstanding. My identification was completely in order. What happened here today goes far beyond a simple error." At that moment, the security team that had followed the Holloway family finally approached, maintaining a professional composure that could not quite hide the anger in their eyes as they observed the governor's disheveled state. "Sir," the lead agent said quietly, "we have documented everything. We have continuous video from the moment the patrol car appeared." Darius nodded in thanks before turning again to Captain Brooks. "I expect a full investigation," he said simply. "But right now, my priority is getting my children to their science fair. They have worked too hard for this to be ruined." That statement, perhaps more than anything else, demonstrated Darius's extraordinary character to everyone present, his ability to put his children's needs above his own trauma and humiliation. Elise, who had been comforting the twins, approached with a first aid kit from the car. "You're bleeding," she said softly, raising her hand to carefully clean the cut on his cheekbone. For a brief moment, in the gentle touch of his wife's hand, Darius allowed his stoic facade to crack slightly, revealing a flicker of vulnerability on his face. "I'm fine," he assured her, though both of them knew it was not entirely true. Captain Brooks now faced Harlan directly, her voice low but charged with intensity. "You had better hope your body camera was on, officer," she warned, "and you are on administrative leave effective immediately." Harlan's face flushed with anger. "Captain, with all due respect, he was speeding and the vehicle matched a description." Captain Brooks cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Save it for the investigation, Harlan. Surrender your badge and weapon before you leave the station today." While this exchange took place, Darius crouched to speak with Malik and Zara, who had finally gotten out of the car but stayed very close to their mother. "Are you both okay?" he asked gently, his heart tightening at the fear still reflected in their eyes. Malik, always the more expressive twin, asked the question Darius had been dreading. "Dad, did he do that because we're black?" The directness of the question created a moment of dense silence. Darius placed his hands on his son's shoulders, knowing this was a defining instant in his children's understanding of race in America. "That's part of it, son," he acknowledged honestly. "But what's important is how we respond to injustice, with dignity and strength." He looked at both children. "Nothing that happened here changes who we are or what we can achieve. Remember that." As the family prepared to continue toward the science fair, Darius pulled Captain Brooks aside for a private word. "I would like to speak alone with Officer Harlan before we leave," he requested. Captain Brooks looked surprised but nodded, escorting Darius and Harlan to a spot beside the patrol car, away from the crowd and the cameras. When they were alone, Darius's expression changed. The diplomatic mask of the governor was replaced by the raw authenticity of a black man who had endured a lifetime of similar humiliations. "Officer Harlan," he said quietly, "I want you to understand something. Today my children watched their father be treated like a criminal for driving while black. They will never forget it. But this is not just about me or my family. How many other black citizens have you treated this way when they didn't have the protection of a title or cameras recording?" Harlan shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, his eyes showing not remorse but resentment at having been exposed and forced to account for himself. "I became governor to create change," Darius continued, "and perhaps today's incident, painful as it is, will serve that purpose in ways my policies alone could not." When Darius turned to leave, Harlan spoke in a voice low enough that only the governor could hear. "This isn't over. You people always make everything about race." The veiled threat and the racial animosity it contained confirmed everything Darius had suspected about the man's character. Instead of responding in kind, Darius simply looked at him with something close to pity. "You're right about one thing, Officer Harlan. This isn't over." When Darius returned to his family, he found that Elise had helped the children reorganize their science fair materials that had been scattered. Despite what had happened, Darius insisted on continuing to the school exactly as planned. "We are not going to let this stop us," he said firmly, straightening his tie and doing everything he could to look presentable. As the Holloway family drove away toward the school, now with a police escort provided apologetically by Captain Brooks, the video of the incident had already reached national media outlets. Harlan sat alone in a department vehicle waiting to be taken back to the station, unaware that his actions had just ignited what would become one of the most significant civil rights controversies of the year. The crowd dispersed slowly, but the story was only beginning to expand, racing across social media, news alerts, and text messages throughout the country. A stark reminder that even at the highest levels of power, the color of one's skin could still determine how someone was treated by those sworn to protect and serve. The fluorescent lights of the school gymnasium cast an artificial glow over the rows of science fair projects. The normality of the scene created an unsettling contrast with the trauma the Holloway family had lived less than an hour earlier. Darius stood beside his children's renewable energy exhibit. His torn shirt was now hidden under a school sweatshirt borrowed from the physical education teacher. His public smile remained steady, despite the sharp pain in his wrists and the sting on his cheekbone. Parents and teachers stared and whispered, for news of the incident had spread faster than the family had taken to arrive. The school principal had offered to reschedule the twins' presentation, but Darius had insisted they continue. "They have worked too hard for this moment," he had said, firmly refusing to allow Officer Harlan's actions to derail yet another aspect of his children's lives. When the science fair judges approached their table, Zara began the presentation nervously while Malik operated their working model of a solar and wind energy station. Darius felt a surge of pride watching them push past fear and distraction to deliver a compelling presentation. Their resilience was a testament to the strength that had sustained their ancestors through centuries of injustice. Throughout the event, Darius's phone vibrated endlessly with calls from his staff, from the media, and from political allies and opponents alike, all demanding statements or explanations about the viral videos already circulating online. He ignored them all, focusing solely on being present for his children in that important moment. When the judges awarded the twins first place in the environmental science category, the genuine smiles that lit up Malik's and Zara's faces made Darius's decision to continue with the day feel worthwhile. Only when they were driving back to the governor's mansion, trophies held tightly in the twins' proud hands, did Darius finally allow himself to acknowledge the storm waiting for them. "Elise," he said quietly while the children chattered excitedly in the back seat, "this is going to become something bigger than us." His wife reached over to squeeze his hand, her eyes reflecting both anger and determination. "We'll face it together," she assured him. "But I want Harlan held accountable." The governor's mansion was surrounded by news vans when they arrived, forcing them to enter through a secure rear entrance. Inside, Darius found his chief of staff, communications director, legal counsel, and several other key team members waiting with grave expressions. "Sir," began his chief of staff, Adrian Sato, "there is no containing this. The videos have gone viral and every major network is covering the story." Darius nodded. He had expected nothing different. "The children need to speak with a counselor," he told Sato. "Find someone discreet who specializes in trauma and racial identity development." After ensuring the twins were settled with Elise in the family's private quarters, Darius changed into a clean suit and prepared to address his team. The cut on his face had been cleaned and properly bandaged, but he refused makeup to cover it, deciding that the visible mark would speak for itself. "We have several priorities to balance," he told the staff gathered in the mansion's conference room. "The well-being of my family, the public's right to transparency, and the opportunity to create meaningful change." His legal advisor, Simone Harper, spoke first. "Governor, we have grounds for a personal lawsuit against Officer Harlan and potentially against the department, but that could complicate your ability to push systemic reforms." Darius considered for a moment. The personal lawsuit can wait. What cannot wait is addressing the underlying problems that made this possible. By evening, investigative journalists had already uncovered Officer Grant Harlan's troubling record, multiple prior complaints for excessive force against minorities, all dismissed or resolved with minimal disciplinary action. Several black motorists had filed formal complaints describing similar treatment during traffic stops, and a fellow officer had once reported that Harlan used racial slurs, though that complaint had mysteriously disappeared from his file. The police union issued a statement calling for patience while all the facts were gathered, a standard response that felt painfully inadequate in light of the video evidence. On social media, hashtags related to the governor in handcuffs and driving while black trended nationally, with the incident transforming into a flashpoint for the debate over racism in policing. Conservative media outlets began attempting to justify Harlan's actions, questioning why the governor had been driving his own vehicle and suggesting he should have identified himself immediately, as if the burden of preventing his own mistreatment rested on Darius. The quiet dinner the family had planned was interrupted when the school counselor called to report that Malik had suffered a panic attack during his session. "He keeps saying he should have helped you," the counselor explained. "He feels he failed by not protecting his father." Darius closed his eyes, the weight of those words striking him harder than Harlan's violent treatment. "Tell him I'm coming right now," he said, excusing himself from the strategy meeting. He found Malik curled on his bed, eyes red from crying. "Hey, champion," Darius said softly, sitting beside him. "The counselor told me you were having a hard time." Malik could not meet his father's gaze. "I should have done something," the boy whispered. "I just sat there while he hurt you." Darius pulled his son into a tight embrace. "Malik, listen to me. You did exactly what you needed to do to stay safe. That was all I wanted." He pulled back slightly to look his son in the eyes. "Being brave doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means surviving, living so you can change things tomorrow." Later that night, when the children had finally fallen asleep, Darius found Elise in their bedroom organizing a support group by text message with other families who had suffered police abuse. "The Williamson family, the Jacksons, and the Turners are willing to speak at a press conference," she told him. "Their stories need to be heard alongside ours." Darius nodded, sinking wearily onto the edge of the bed. For the first time since the incident in the privacy of their bedroom, he allowed the composure he had maintained with such effort to collapse. His shoulders shook with silent sobs as Elise held him, and the humiliation, fear, and anger of the day finally found an outlet. "I couldn't protect them," he whispered. "My own children had to see that." Elise stroked his back, her own tears falling. "You protected them in the most important way, by staying alive," she said fiercely. "Too many black fathers don't come home after encounters with the police." The next morning, Darius announced his intention to introduce comprehensive police reform legislation, ordering his policy team to accelerate proposals that had previously been considered too controversial to advance. "We'll call it the Public Safety and Accountability Act," he told his assembled cabinet. Body cameras with automatic activation, civilian review boards with real authority, implicit bias training with measurable outcomes, and funding tied to demonstrated improvements. Some political advisors warned of possible backlash from conservative districts and police unions. "This could affect your re-election chances," cautioned a veteran strategist. Darius looked at him steadily. "There are things more important than the next election. My children are watching to see whether their father's power means anything, whether this system can actually change." The district attorney, initially reluctant to bring charges against Harlan, found it impossible to maintain that stance as public pressure mounted and new evidence emerged. A gas station security camera had captured clear footage of Harlan taunting Darius while he was handcuffed, and the body camera audio, despite Harlan's attempts to silence portions, contained enough racial comments to provoke public outrage. Not long after the incident, as Darius prepared for a major address to the state on his police reform proposals, Harlan was formally suspended without pay and charged criminally, a decision that sparked both protests from police supporters and celebrations from civil rights advocates. The Holloway family received both death threats from white supremacist groups and an outpouring of support from citizens across the political spectrum who were disturbed by the visual evidence of such flagrant misconduct. Through it all, Darius maintained public composure while privately supporting his family through their ongoing trauma, Malik's nightmares, Zara's sudden fear of police officers, and Elise's fierce determination to create a support network for families who lacked their resources and platform. The incident had transformed Darius from a respected but conventional governor into a national figure in the ongoing struggle for racial justice, a role he had never sought but would now assume, determined to ensure that the pain his family had endured would lead to protection for countless others who had suffered similar or worse treatment without the shield of a title or the presence of cameras as witnesses. Not long after the incident, the Georgia State Capitol building was surrounded by a sea of divided humanity. Protesters held signs supporting Governor Holloway's police reform bill. Others defended Officer Harlan and traditional policing. Inside the imposing stone structure, Darius stood by the window of his office, watching the crowd below with a mixture of hope and concern. "They're saying it's the largest demonstration at the Capitol in years," commented Lieutenant Governor Sophia Reyes, who had become one of Darius's strongest allies in the push for reform. Darius stepped away from the window, adjusting his tie as he prepared for the crucial legislative session that afternoon. "How are the votes?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Sophia's expression tightened. "It's going to be very close. The police union has been pressing hard, and some of the rural representatives are starting to back away." The Public Safety and Accountability Act, drafted in a week of intensive work after Darius's experience, represented the most comprehensive police reform package ever introduced in Georgia. It mandated automatic body camera activation during all stops, civilian oversight boards with real disciplinary power, implicit bias training with measurable outcomes, psychological evaluations for officers with complaint histories, and, perhaps most controversially, the redirection of certain funds from military-style equipment toward community conflict resolution programs. Political battle lines were drawn immediately, with the police union organizing the massive protest outside. Officer Grant Harlan, though suspended and facing possible criminal charges, had suddenly been elevated as a symbol for those who viewed reform efforts as a direct attack on law enforcement. Harlan had appeared on several conservative programs, presenting himself as a dedicated officer who had made an understandable mistake in a high-tension situation. "I respect the office of governor," he had said in one particularly viral interview, "but no one is above the law, and officers have to make split-second decisions to ensure public safety." The cynical inversion of roles, presenting Harlan as a defender of law and order rather than the perpetrator of misconduct, infuriated Darius's supporters but resonated with a significant portion of the public. As Darius prepared to leave his office for the House of Representatives, his phone rang with a call from Elise. "How are the children today?" he asked immediately, never allowing his public responsibilities to overshadow his concern for his family. Elise's sigh came through the phone. "The school counselor called again. Some classmates are repeating things they heard from their parents about the incident, telling Malik that his father is attacking the police. I got into an argument defending you." Darius closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of how this controversy was affecting his children. "I'll talk with him tonight," he promised. "And Zara?" Elise admitted she was still having trouble sleeping. "She wants to know if the bad policeman is going to come to our house." The pain caused by his daughter's fear cut deeper than any physical injury Harlan had inflicted. "We're going to get through this," Darius assured his wife, though the road ahead seemed increasingly complicated. After hanging up, his chief of staff reminded him of the time, and Darius prepared himself mentally for the legislative battle ahead. The House of Representatives fell silent when Darius stepped to the podium. The gravity of the moment was reflected in the unusually full gallery and the row of press cameras. "Not long ago," Darius began, his voice firm and measured, "I lived what too many of our citizens face every day, the terrifying reality of being singled out and mistreated because of the color of my skin." He paused, looking directly at the assembled representatives. But my story is not unique. What is singular is that it happened to someone with the platform necessary to demand change. Then Darius did something unprecedented in that formal setting. He shared a deeply personal story about his father, Elias Holloway, who had died during an encounter with police years earlier. He had rarely spoken publicly of that family tragedy, the loss that in many ways had set him on the path of public service. "My father was unarmed, stopped for a broken taillight," Darius recounted, his composure faltering for an instant. "The official report claimed he was aggressive. My mother was left alone to raise me with nothing but questions about what really happened that night." The chamber remained in absolute silence as Darius connected his personal history to the present crisis. "This is not about one officer or one incident," he continued. "It is about a system that has failed too many people for too long. Reform is not anti-police, it is pro-justice." While Darius spoke, across the city, Officer Harlan met with his legal team and representatives of the police union. Despite his public bravado, the growing evidence against him and the governor's powerful advocacy had begun to unsettle even his strongest defenders. "The body camera footage is damaging," the union attorney admitted. "And we've discovered a witness who claims you made threatening statements to the governor during that private conversation beside the patrol car." Harlan paced nervously around the conference room. "It's his word against mine," he insisted. "And there are plenty of officers and citizens who support me." The attorney looked skeptical. "Internal affairs is not going well for you, Grant. And now this witness has come forward. Officer Brennan is prepared to testify that you made racially charged comments even before you stopped the governor." Harlan slammed his hand on the table. That rookie doesn't know anything about real police work. What Harlan did not know was that his increasingly erratic behavior, excessive drinking, and late-night threats against the governor, along with text messages sent to other officers, had already begun to alienate even those who had initially been willing to support him. Back at the Capitol, the debate over the reform bill had grown intense. Representative Clyde Mercer, a conservative from a rural district, argued, "This bill is a knee-jerk reaction to an unfortunate incident. Our officers need more support, not more restrictions." Darius listened from the gallery while his allies responded with statistics, personal testimonies, and appeals to shared values of fairness and accountability. Procedural maneuvers began, with opponents attempting to send the bill for further study, a common tactic to kill legislation without voting directly against it. During a recess, Darius received unexpected support from retired Police Commissioner Elias Grant, who had served in the Atlanta Department for 3 decades before retiring. "Governor," the older man said, approaching Darius in a private hallway, "I've seen the damage that bad officers can do to community trust. Your bill is tough but fair. I would like to support it publicly." That endorsement from a respected law enforcement veteran provided a crucial boost as the debate stretched into the night. Meanwhile, Harlan had begun to spiral further, convinced a conspiracy was forming against him. After leaving his legal meeting, he drove past the school of the Holloway children, an intimidation tactic reported to security by an alert teacher who recognized him. This action violated the terms of his administrative leave and would later become another charge against him. When the final vote on the police reform bill was taken near midnight, it fell 3 votes short of passage, a significant setback despite the enormous effort. Still, Darius refused to concede defeat and immediately announced he would reintroduce the legislation with specific modifications to address certain concerns. "This is not about winning or losing a single vote," he told reporters afterward. "It is about persisting until justice prevails." When Darius finally returned home in the early hours of the morning, he found Elise waiting for him, still awake. "I saw the vote," she said, embracing him tightly. "I'm sorry." Darius held her for a long moment, drawing strength from her support. "We knew this was going to be a fight," he replied, "but we're only just beginning." Without either of them knowing it, at that very moment Officer Harlan sat in his car outside a bar, drunk and enraged, scrolling through news about the failed vote and forming a plan that would change everything by dawn. "Would you have given up after such a significant legislative defeat?" Comment with the number 1 if you believe persistence is key in the fight for justice, or with the number 2 if you think Darius should find another strategy after this setback. Hit like on this video if you have ever had to face opposition for something you believed was right. Subscribe to discover what desperate action Officer Harlan takes next, and how it completely transforms this already explosive situation. How far would you go to protect your family from someone who has already proven himself dangerous? The Holloway family is about to face that question in the most terrifying way. The underground parking garage beneath the Capitol building was nearly empty. In the early morning hours, the concrete structure was lit by fluorescent lights that cast harsh shadows between the columns. Darius yawned as he walked toward his official vehicle, having returned for an early meeting after barely 3 hours of sleep. The defeat of his bill still weighed heavily, but a lifetime of fighting uphill had taught him resilience. I was already drafting mental revisions that might convince wavering legislators without abandoning the core reforms. The sound of footsteps echoing behind him barely registered until they suddenly accelerated, too fast for a normal walk. Darius turned just as Grant Harlan appeared from behind a concrete pillar, his face twisted with rage and alcohol. "You ruined my life," Harlan snarled, closing the distance between them with alarming speed. Darius stepped back instinctively, registering several unsettling signs at once. Harlan was not in uniform, his eyes were bloodshot, and most alarming, his hand was moving toward the weapon visible under his jacket. "Officer Harlan," Darius said calmly, raising his hands in a non-threatening gesture while scanning for security cameras and possible exits. "You should not be here." Harlan let out a bitter laugh, a sound without humor. "I'm not an officer anymore, thanks to you. Suspended without pay. My wife left with the kids. Everyone treating me like some kind of monster." The smell of alcohol was overwhelming even from several steps away. Darius maintained his composure despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Grant," he said deliberately, using the first name to humanize the exchange. "This is not helping your situation. Let's talk about this rationally." Harlan took another step forward, his hand now resting on his weapon. "Rational? You want rational? How about this for rational? I know where your kids go to school. I drove by there. Nice place, not much security." The barely veiled threat against his children shattered Darius's diplomatic approach, and a cold fury replaced his caution. "If you come near my family," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low tone, "there will not be a place on this earth where you can hide." The steel in the governor's voice stopped Harlan for an instant, but alcohol and desperation quickly crushed that moment of clarity. "Big man with your title," Harlan sneered, drawing the weapon and pointing it at Darius with an unsteady hand. "Not so powerful now, are you?" The parking garage security cameras captured what happened next in silent, incriminating footage that would be viewed millions of times in the days that followed. As Harlan waved the gun erratically, Darius assessed his limited options, trapped between parked cars with no immediate cover. Just as Harlan's finger moved toward the trigger, a shout rang through the garage. "Police! Drop the weapon!" 2 Capitol security officers had spotted the confrontation on their monitors and responded with extraordinary speed. Harlan turned toward the new threat with the weapon still raised, creating a critical decision moment for the responding officers. What followed was a textbook example of correct police procedure, exactly the opposite of Harlan's actions during the traffic stop. The officers took cover, identified themselves clearly, and gave Harlan multiple opportunities to surrender peacefully. When he refused and turned his weapon toward them, they fired a single shot that struck him in the shoulder, followed immediately by appropriate medical response and careful arrest protocols. Darius was quickly secured by other officers who arrived on the scene moments later. His usually unshakable composure finally cracked as he fully absorbed what had just occurred. "He threatened my children," Darius told the security team, his hands trembling slightly. "He said he went to their school." Within half an hour, the Holloway family was under heightened security at the governor's mansion. Elise held the frightened twins tightly while Darius explained the situation as carefully as possible. "The man who hurt Dad made bad decisions because he was angry," he told them, trying not to traumatize them further while ensuring they understood the increased security presence. But he can't hurt us anymore. Meanwhile, Harlan was in surgery at Atlanta Medical Center. His wound was not life-threatening but serious enough to keep him hospitalized under police custody. The charges against him multiplied exponentially: assault with a deadly weapon, terrorist threats against a public official, attempted murder, and violation of the terms of his administrative leave. Even the police union immediately distanced itself, issuing a statement condemning his actions and emphasizing that he represented the antithesis of professional policing. The garage security footage spread across social media and news outlets, providing irrefutable evidence of Harlan's uncontrolled behavior and vindication for Darius. Public opinion shifted dramatically overnight, and even previously skeptical commentators acknowledged the governor's remarkable composure in the face of a lethal threat. By midday, 3 legislators who had voted against the reform bill approached Darius's office requesting a meeting to discuss a change of position. "Sometimes it takes a dramatic demonstration of the problem," Darius told his chief of staff as they prepared for the meeting, though he would have preferred a less dangerous one. Not long afterward, the slightly revised version of the Public Safety and Accountability Act passed by a comfortable margin, as the garage confrontation had silenced many critics and highlighted exactly the problems the reform sought to address: the need for better psychological evaluations, accountability for problem officers, and transparent disciplinary procedures. As Darius signed the legislation into law, surrounded by civil rights leaders and families who had lost loved ones to police violence, he reflected on the painful path that had led to this moment. The twins stood beside him during the signing ceremony. Their presence was both a powerful symbol and a personal triumph, showing them that from trauma and injustice positive change could emerge. "This law will not solve everything," Darius acknowledged in his speech, "but it creates a foundation for the work that still remains, building a system where everyone receives equal treatment under the law, where badges are symbols of protection rather than fear, and where officers who uphold the highest standards are not stained by those who abuse their power." Harlan's trial began not long afterward, with Darius scheduled to testify about both the original traffic stop and the parking garage confrontation. Preparing for that testimony forced him to relive both traumatic events in exhaustive detail alongside the prosecution team. The night before his appearance, Darius sat with Malik and Zara in their room, answering their questions about the justice system and why their father needed to participate. "Sometimes," he explained, "standing up and telling the truth is the bravest thing you can do, even when it's hard or scary." Zara, who had been most affected by the original incident, asked quietly, "Are you afraid to see him again, Dad?" Darius considered carefully, respecting his daughter enough to give an honest answer. "A little," he admitted, "but I'm more determined than afraid, and sometimes that's what courage is, being afraid but doing the right thing anyway." In the courtroom the next day, Darius took the stand with dignified composure, recounting both incidents with clear, factual testimony. Despite the aggressive cross-examination by Harlan's defense attorney, who tried to present the traffic stop as a reasonable mistake and the garage confrontation as a mental health crisis rather than a malicious act. When asked about his feelings toward the defendant, Darius looked directly at Harlan, who sat slumped at the defense table. "I feel sadness," Darius said thoughtfully. "Sadness that Officer Harlan never received the intervention he clearly needed early in his career. Sadness for the other citizens he mistreated before me, and sadness for his family, who are also victims of his choices." The response, lacking the anger or desire for vengeance many expected, had a profound impact on the jury and spectators. Harlan also took the stand in his own defense, a decision his attorneys had advised against. Under the pressure of cross-examination, his carefully constructed narrative of being a dedicated officer who had made an isolated mistake quickly collapsed. He became combative, made contradictory statements, and ended up revealing precisely the prejudices and temper problems that had led to the original incident. When the verdict was announced, no one was surprised. Guilty on all counts. At the sentencing hearing, Darius made an unexpected request to address the court. "Your Honor," he said, standing before the judge, "while Mr. Harlan must face the consequences of his actions, I respectfully request that the court include mandatory treatment for his evident problems with alcohol and anger control. Punishment alone will not address the underlying issues that brought us here." This gesture of grace from the victim toward his aggressor made national headlines, with commentators noting that Darius had demonstrated the highest principles of justice, accountability accompanied by the opportunity for rehabilitation. As Harlan was escorted away to begin serving his sentence, Darius turned to his family seated behind him. "It's over," he said quietly. Though everyone knew the work of reform was only beginning, the following day, Darius invited to the governor's office Officer Cole Brennan, the rookie who had been Harlan's partner, and who had eventually testified about his pattern of misconduct. "You made a difficult but correct decision," Darius told the young officer. "That kind of moral courage is exactly what we need in law enforcement." Brennan, nervous about meeting the governor, admitted, "I knew from the beginning that what he was doing was wrong, but I was afraid to speak up." Darius nodded with understanding. "The reforms we have passed include whistleblower protections precisely for situations like yours. Change happens one courageous decision at a time." As time passed, the Holloway family began to show signs of recovery from their traumatic experiences. The twins participated in a specialized therapeutic program for children affected by racial trauma, and Darius and Elise attended family sessions to process their collective experience. Malik, who had struggled with anger and fear in the weeks afterward, channeled his emotions by creating a youth advocacy group at his school. Zara, with her natural empathy, began collaborating alongside her mother in the support network for families affected by police abuse. For Darius, the personal experience had transformed his governorship, bringing him both moral authority and a practical understanding of one of the most complex problems facing the state. Implementation of the new reforms began to show promising early results, with a decrease in racial profiling complaints and improved community satisfaction with police interactions in departments that had adopted the changes with conviction. "This was not the path I would have chosen," Darius reflected during a quiet moment with Elise on their anniversary. "But perhaps it was the path that needed to be walked." The marble steps of the Georgia State Capitol gleamed under the July sun as thousands gathered for what the media described as the largest civil rights demonstration in Atlanta since the 1960s. Months had passed since the garage confrontation, and Darius Holloway stood before a podium in front of the massive crowd, with the final vote on the expanded version of the Public Safety and Accountability Act scheduled for later that same afternoon. "We stand at a crossroads." His voice resonated through the microphones across the plaza, amplifying his measured tone to the farthest corners of the assembled supporters. "Behind us lies a history of injustice too painful to ignore. Ahead of us, a future we must build together with courage and conviction." The crowd's response was electric, with signs bearing slogans like "Justice for All" and "Reform Now" waving over a sea of diverse faces. Not everyone supported the governor's initiatives, however. Across the street, a smaller but vocal counter-demonstration had formed, composed mainly of police supporters and conservative activists concerned about the impact of the reforms on law enforcement capabilities. Their signs proclaimed support for police and safety first, a physical manifestation of the divided public opinion that had characterized the debate. Inside the Capitol building, legislative aides hurried through the halls as last-minute lobbying intensified. The expanded bill, which built on the initial reforms with additional funding for community policing programs and stricter oversight mechanisms, had become the defining legislation of Darius's governorship. Elise Holloway moved through the crowd with determination, coordinating a group of families who had been affected by police abuse. Each wore matching blue ribbons that had become a symbol of the reform movement. The twins were at home with their grandparents. Darius and Elise had decided the politically charged atmosphere might be too intense for them after everything they had lived through. While the demonstration continued outside, Darius was called for a series of interviews with national news organizations that had come to Atlanta to cover what had become a model for police reform efforts across the country. "Governor Holloway," began the interviewer from a major cable news network, "your personal experience has clearly influenced your approach to these reforms. How do you respond to critics who say this is an emotional reaction rather than a practical one?" Darius leaned slightly forward with a serious but serene expression. "I would say that the best policy combines both emotional intelligence and practical solutions. My experience opened a door, but the policy itself is based on data, best practices, and input from law enforcement professionals who understand that accountability strengthens rather than weakens their standing in the community." The interview then turned to Darius's extraordinary journey, from a child who lost his father to police violence, to community organizer, state senator, and now a governor leading transformative change. Darius spoke candidly about how the trauma of the traffic stop had affected his family, especially his children. "Malik and Zara have shown incredible resilience," he said, paternal pride evident in his voice. "They have transformed their pain into purpose in ways that humble and inspire me every day." Across the city, in the Atlanta Federal Courthouse, Brian. Grant Harlan's trial was approaching its conclusion. The prosecution had presented a devastating case combining the garage security footage with testimony from fellow officers about Harlan's history of misconduct and the body camera evidence from the original traffic stop. Harlan's defense team had attempted to present him as someone suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and alcoholism, conditions they argued had been exacerbated by the pressures of the job and a lack of adequate support from the department. "My client made terrible mistakes," his attorney acknowledged in closing arguments, "but he is also a victim of a system that fails to address the mental health challenges officers face." The jury appeared unmoved by that attempt to shift responsibility, their expressions reflecting the widespread public disgust at Harlan's actions captured so clearly on video. Darius had testified earlier in the week, maintaining the same dignified composure he had shown throughout the experience. Harlan's attorney had tried to provoke an emotional response through aggressive questioning, suggesting the governor was exploiting the incident for political gain. "Isn't it convenient, Governor Holloway, that this incident gave you the platform to push controversial legislation that had previously been stalled?" Darius paused before responding with a measured, reflective answer. "There is nothing convenient about being handcuffed in front of my children because of the color of my skin, or about being threatened with a gun in a parking garage. What would be truly inconceivable would be to live those experiences and not work to prevent others from suffering the same fate." The courtroom fell silent at his response. Even the defense attorney was momentarily speechless. When Harlan himself took the stand, the contrast could not have been sharper. At first he tried to appear remorseful, but his facade crumbled under cross-examination, revealing the same volatile temper that had led to the confrontation. "You don't understand what it's like," he snapped at the prosecutor after a particularly pointed question about his threats against the governor's children. "Every day we put our lives on the line and people like him make it harder to do our jobs." That moment of unfiltered resentment, captured by courtroom cameras and replayed endlessly on news and social media, effectively sealed his fate. Back at the Capitol, the legislative session had begun with the gallery filled to capacity as debate on the reform bill commenced. Representatives from both parties presented their arguments. The discussion grew intense at moments but remained largely substantive. Darius watched from the section reserved for the governor, noting with satisfaction that several legislators who had opposed the initial bill were now speaking in support of the expanded version. "Sometimes," Sophia Reyes whispered, seated beside him, "it takes seeing the worst of humanity to bring out the best in our institutions." Darius nodded, thinking of Harlan's shocking attack in the garage and how it had transformed public opinion practically overnight. When the final vote was called shortly after 4 in the afternoon, the result appeared on the electronic board at the front of the chamber. 63 in favor, 38 against. The bill had passed by a more comfortable margin than anyone had predicted, prompting a spontaneous eruption of applause from the gallery, despite rules prohibiting such demonstrations. Outside, the crowd received the news through text messages and social media alerts. Cheers swept through the demonstration as Darius stepped onto the steps to address his supporters. "Today, Georgia chooses progress over fear," he announced, his voice charged with emotion yet steady. "We choose accountability over impunity, and most importantly, we choose justice over convenience." While he spoke, across the city, the jury in Harlan's trial reached its verdict after only 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts, with sentencing to be determined the following week. The news reached the Capitol steps just as Darius concluded his remarks, and an aide discreetly showed it to him on her phone. He acknowledged it with a slight nod but chose not to mention it to the crowd, wanting the focus to remain on the positive achievement of the reforms rather than the punishment of a single individual. Later that night, in a more intimate gathering at the governor's mansion, Darius welcomed the families who had been instrumental in building support for the legislation, including those who had lost loved ones to police violence years earlier, long before his own incident had brought national attention to the issue. "Your persistence laid the foundation," he told them, raising a glass in tribute. "My experience simply added momentum to the path you began long ago." A mother whose son had died during a no-knock raid on the wrong address years earlier embraced Darius with tears streaming down her face. "For years no one wanted to listen," she said. "But now, because of what happened to you, they can no longer ignore us." The bittersweet nature of this victory was not lost on Darius. The knowledge that his position and visibility had accelerated changes for which others had fought unsuccessfully reinforced his commitment to use his platform to amplify voices that had been systematically silenced. In the days that followed, as implementation of the reforms began, Darius focused on ensuring the changes were more than symbolic. He appointed a diverse oversight committee that included both law enforcement veterans committed to positive change and community advocates with firsthand experience of discriminatory practices. Captain Naomi Brooks, who had apologized so deeply for Harlan's actions, was promoted to lead a new training division focused on de-escalation techniques and recognition of implicit bias. The changes were not without resistance. Several officers resigned in protest, claiming the reforms undermined their authority, while others welcomed the opportunity to rebuild trust with the community. National attention brought both praise and criticism, and Darius received everything from death threats to being named Person of the Year by a major magazine. Through it all, he maintained the same steady presence that had characterized his response from the moment Harlan first stopped him, neither seeking the spotlight nor shirking the responsibility that came with it. At Harlan's sentencing hearing, Darius fulfilled his earlier request that opportunities for rehabilitation be included alongside punishment. "Justice is not served by warehousing human beings without addressing the underlying problems that led them to commit their crimes," he told reporters afterward. "That is true for everyone in our system, not only those who have personally harmed me." This philosophy became the cornerstone of the next phase of Darius's administration, a comprehensive criminal justice system reform initiative that built on the momentum of the police accountability measures. Months after the traffic stop that changed everything, Darius received an unexpected call from the White House. "Mr. President," he answered, surprised by the direct contact rather than the usual staff intermediary. "Governor Holloway," the familiar voice replied, "I have been watching with great interest what you have accomplished in Georgia. We are considering similar federal legislation, and I would like your thoughts on the approach." The conversation that followed lasted nearly an hour, with Darius offering frank reflections on both the policy details and the political strategy that had made success possible. After hanging up, Elise entered his study with a smile. "Important call?" she asked, recognizing his thoughtful expression. "Potentially," he replied. "The president is interested in taking our reforms national." Elise sat beside him and took his hand. "From being handcuffed against the hood of our car to advising the president in a matter of months. Life takes unexpected turns." Darius nodded, squeezing her hand. "I keep thinking about what my mother used to say. Sometimes your worst day becomes the doorway to your greatest purpose." Through the study window they could see Malik teaching Zara a basketball move on the mansion's small court. Both were laughing in the Sunday afternoon light. Their resilience remained the achievement of which Darius felt most proud, their ability to process trauma without allowing it to define them. As evening approached, the Holloway family gathered for dinner, a ritual they protected fiercely despite the growing demands on Darius's time. Conversation flowed naturally from school projects to upcoming community events. Normality was a precious counterweight to the public scrutiny that had become their everyday reality. Later, while Darius tucked the twins into bed, Zara asked a question that caught him off guard. "Dad, do you think Officer Harlan is sorry for what he did?" Darius sat on the edge of her bed, considering how to answer honestly while still honoring his daughter's compassion. "I don't know, sweetheart," he admitted. "True remorse requires understanding the impact of your actions on others. I hope that someday he comes to understand it, but that is a path he will have to choose for himself." As he kissed them goodnight, Darius felt the familiar mixture of hope and determination that had sustained him through the most difficult months of his life. The conviction that meaningful change was possible even in the face of fierce resistance, and the certainty that the work was far from finished. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opposition, and new opportunities to build the more just world his children deserved. One policy, one conversation, and one transformed heart at a time. A year after the traffic stop that had ignited a national conversation about race and policing, Governor Darius Holloway stood before a podium facing the latest graduating class of the Georgia State Police Academy. The auditorium was filled with young recruits in impeccable uniforms, their expressions combining pride and solemnity as they prepared to take their oath of service. Among the graduates was Darius's nephew, Kai Holloway, who had been inspired by his uncle's experience to pursue a career in law enforcement, determined to be part of the change from within. "Today you enter a profession that carries both extraordinary privilege and profound responsibility," Darius began, his voice reaching the farthest corners of the room. "The badge you will wear represents the trust that citizens place in you, a trust that must be earned anew in every interaction, every traffic stop, every moment when someone's dignity and rights are in your hands." The cadets listened intently, aware that their training had been fundamentally transformed by the Holloway reforms, as the media had named the sweeping changes implemented over the past year. Where previously preparation had focused primarily on tactical responses and use of force, equal emphasis was now given to de-escalation, cultural competence, and the historical context of policing in communities of color. Statistical evidence of the reform's impact was beginning to emerge, with civilian complaints reduced by a significant percentage, violent confrontations decreased substantially, and community satisfaction surveys showing notable improvements across all demographic groups. Most significantly, incidents of racial profiling during traffic stops had declined dramatically, a direct response to the experience that had catalyzed the changes. As Darius continued his speech, sharing personal reflections and public policy analysis, his gaze returned from time to time to his nephew in the front row. Kai represented a new generation of officers entering the service with eyes wide open to both the challenges and the opportunities for meaningful change. When the ceremony concluded, Darius greeted each graduate individually, offering a handshake and a personal word of encouragement. Several cadets mentioned that his story had influenced their decision to pursue a career in law enforcement, seeing the opportunity to be part of a transformative moment in the history of policing. Across the city, in a community center located in one of Atlanta's historically underserved neighborhoods, Grant Harlan sat in a circle with other participants in a restorative justice program. Released after serving 8 months of his sentence, Harlan was now required to complete an intensive rehabilitation program that included addiction treatment, anger management, and participation in community dialogues about the impact of discriminatory policing. The changes in Harlan were subtle but significant, the belligerent, defensive attitude gradually giving way to moments of genuine reflection. "I never saw myself as racist," he explained to the group in words that were clearly difficult to speak. "I told myself I was just being a good cop, treating everyone the same way I'd treat anyone who acted suspicious." An older black woman in the circle shook her head gently. "But that's exactly the point, isn't it? You saw a black man in a nice car and immediately thought suspicious. That's what we've been trying to help you understand." Harlan nodded slowly, the painful process of confronting his prejudices reflected on his face. He was still far from a complete transformation, occasionally falling back into justifications and excuses, but the foundation for change had been established through consistent accountability combined with the opportunity to grow. The Community Center program was one of several initiatives funded by the Holloway reforms designed to address not only current policing practices, but also the rehabilitation of officers who had been removed from service for misconduct. Later that same afternoon, in an event no one could have predicted a year earlier, Darius arrived at that same community center for a scheduled appearance and found himself face-to-face with Harlan for the first time since the trial. The moment was captured by a documentary crew filming a series about the reforms. The tension was palpable as the two men regarded each other from opposite sides of the room. Harlan spoke first, his voice stripped of the arrogant confidence that had characterized their earlier interactions. "Governor Holloway," he said, extending his hand with visible uncertainty. "I didn't know you'd be here today." Darius considered the offered hand for a moment before accepting it, his expression neither hostile nor particularly warm. "Mr. Harlan," he replied simply, "how are you finding the program?" What followed was not the dramatic confrontation many would have expected, but a measured, sometimes uncomfortable conversation between two men, forever bound by a moment of injustice and its far-reaching consequences. Harlan spoke of his ongoing therapy, of the painful recognition of patterns in his behavior he had never examined before. Darius listened more than he spoke, asking professional questions that reflected genuine interest in the rehabilitation process. "My children," Darius said at one point, "still have nightmares sometimes. Malik especially still tenses up when he sees a police car." Harlan lowered his gaze, the impact of his actions on innocent children clearly affecting him in a way his own legal consequences had not. "I think about them a lot," he admitted quietly. "More than I thought I would. It's something my therapist and I talk about, how I never really saw the people I was affecting as human beings with families and feelings." The conversation concluded without dramatic revelations or tearful apologies, just two human beings navigating the complex aftermath of a moment that had changed both their lives, though in profoundly different ways. As Darius prepared to leave, Harlan asked a question that seemed to have been weighing on him. "Do you think people can really change, or am I just going through the motions?" Darius considered carefully. "I believe transformation is possible," he answered finally, "but it requires an honest confrontation with uncomfortable truths and the humility to rebuild from there. It's not about becoming someone different. It's about becoming who you should have been from the beginning." That evening at the Holloway home, the family gathered for dinner, a ritual they maintained despite increasingly demanding schedules. Malik and Zara, now a year older, had grown visibly during that difficult year, not only physically but in their understanding of the world and their place within it. Both had become advocates in their own right, Malik founding a student organization focused on social justice issues, while Zara channeled her experience into poetry that had received national recognition for its powerful exploration of race, fear, and resilience. "I saw him today," Darius told Elise privately after the twins had gone to bed, describing the unexpected encounter with Harlan. "How did that feel?" she asked, concern reflected on her face. Darius sighed, searching for the right words. "Complicated. There's a part of me that will never forget watching him handcuff me in front of our children. But there's another part that sees a human being struggling to face some very hard truths about himself. Both things can be true at the same time." The following week, Darius announced his candidacy for the United States Senate, a decision that surprised few political observers. His handling of the Harlan incident and the subsequent reforms had elevated his national profile, and many saw him as a voice of calm reason in increasingly polarized times. "I never planned this path," he acknowledged in his announcement speech, "but sometimes the most painful moments in life reveal your true purpose." The campaign gained momentum quickly, with support crossing traditional party lines. Even some who had initially opposed the police reforms recognized the thoughtful, balanced approach Darius had brought to a complex issue. His message centered on finding common ground amid difference, accountability accompanied by the opportunity for redemption, and the ongoing work of building fairer institutions. 6 weeks into the campaign, Darius was driving alone to a public engagement when he noticed the flash of police lights in his rearview mirror. The familiar knot formed in his stomach, the physical memory of trauma persisting despite every rational understanding of how much had changed. He pulled over carefully, using his turn signal, placing both hands visibly on the steering wheel exactly as he had taught his son. The officer who approached was young, her movements professional but not aggressive as she reached the window. "Good afternoon, sir. License and registration, please." Darius identified himself and asked permission before reaching for his wallet. The officer's eyes widened slightly as she recognized him. "Governor Holloway. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was you." Darius handed her his license. "No need to apologize, officer. I was speeding." She shook her head. "You have a burned-out taillight, sir. I just wanted to let you know so you can get it fixed." She returned the license without running it through the system, then hesitated a moment. "Sir, I just want to say that I was in the first class that went through the new training program. It's making a difference, not only in how we do our jobs, but in how the community sees us." As Darius drove away after what had been an impeccable example of a respectful professional traffic stop, he reflected on the distance traveled over the past year, the progress made and the road still ahead. The trauma remained present, emerging in unexpected moments. The way Malik still tensed at the sight of police cars, the extra precautions Elise took when the family traveled, the constant vigilance, the price Black Americans paid regardless of status or achievement. And yet, alongside those painful realities, tangible progress had taken root. The reforms that bore his name were being studied and adapted by departments across the country. Aspiring officers like his nephew were entering the profession with a fundamentally different understanding of their role in the community. Even someone like Harlan, who had embodied the worst of the system, was being given the opportunity for a path toward meaningful transformation. 2 months later, at a campaign rally in Atlanta, Darius noticed an unexpected face in the crowd. Harlan stood at the back of the audience, not wearing a campaign button or showing obvious support, simply listening as Darius outlined his vision for federal criminal justice reform. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, an acknowledgement rather than a reconciliation, the recognition of a shared history and of divergent paths forward. When Darius concluded his speech to enthusiastic applause, he began making his way through the crowd, shaking hands and speaking with attendees. Harlan remained in place, and eventually Darius reached him. The two men stood face to face as cameras captured the moment. "I didn't expect to see you here," Darius said honestly. Harlan shifted uncomfortably. "I'm still trying to figure things out, but what you said about second chances and redemption, about building systems that hold people accountable while still offering them paths forward, it made sense to me." Darius nodded, offering neither easy absolution nor clinging to resentment. "That's all any of us can do. Keep trying to understand. Keep moving forward." As they shook hands, a photographer captured the image that would appear in newspapers across the country the next day. Not a story of friendship or forgiveness, but a more complex narrative about justice, responsibility, and the difficult, necessary work of transformation, both personal and systemic. In the final weeks of the campaign, with polls showing Darius holding a commanding lead, he took a day off to attend a ceremony at his children's school, where Zara was receiving an award for her poetry collection titled Aftermath. The poems recounted her experience during the traffic stop and its consequences from a child's perspective, the fear and confusion giving way to understanding, and finally to the determination to create change. As Darius listened to his daughter read her work before an auditorium filled with classmates, teachers, and parents, he felt both the weight of everything his family had endured and a deep pride in the way they had transformed pain into purpose. Later that night, driving home with the family, they passed a patrol car parked at the side of the road. Darius noticed Malik watching it cautiously as they left it behind, the trauma response still present but less intense than before. "You know," Darius said softly, "that officer may have gone through the training program you helped create with your activism." Malik thought for a moment. "Maybe," he conceded, "but I still feel better when they're behind us and not following us." That honest observation captured the reality of their journey, the significant progress that coexisted with persistent vigilance, the understanding that transformation was neither immediate nor complete, but an ongoing process requiring commitment, courage, and a clear-eyed view of both the distance traveled and the challenges that still remained. When Darius won the Senate race by a comfortable margin, becoming Georgia's newest representative in Washington, the story of the traffic stop that had nearly destroyed his family became only one chapter within a larger narrative of service and advocacy. Yet it remained a defining moment, a painful catalyst that had revealed both the depth of systemic injustice and the possibility of real change when courage meets opportunity. In his victory speech with Elise and the twins at his side, Darius reflected on the path traveled. A wise person once said that our deepest wounds can become our greatest sources of healing for others. What happened to our family could have left us bitter and broken. Instead, it became the foundation for changes that will protect other families from living the same trauma. That transformation, from victimhood to agency, from pain to purpose, is the story I hope to keep writing with you in Washington. As the audience erupted in applause, Darius embraced his family. Their private smiles communicated what words could not: the shared knowledge of how far they had come, and the commitment to continue the journey together, transforming America's most painful legacies into its most promising possibilities. One policy, one conversation, and one life at a time. What would you have done if you had been in Governor Holloway's position? Would you have used your experience to drive systemic change? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, please hit like, subscribe to our channel for more true stories of courage and social change, and share this video with someone who needs to understand how racism persists at every level of society, even for those who hold positions of power. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of America's most important and ongoing conversations about race, justice, and the possibility of real transformation. This powerful story illustrates several profound truths about racial injustice in America. First, racism does not discriminate by status or achievement. Even a governor can face racial profiling and brutality. Second, dignity in the face of injustice can be a powerful catalyst for change. Darius Holloway's calm response during both confrontations demonstrated extraordinary strength that ultimately proved more powerful than Harlan's aggression. Third, transformation requires both accountability and opportunity. Real change occurred because Harlan faced consequences while also being offered a path toward redemption. Fourth, systemic problems require systemic solutions. Individual incidents of racism reflect broader institutional issues that can only be addressed through comprehensive reform. Fifth, trauma leaves lasting scars, especially on children, but it can also inspire purpose and resilience. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, privilege carries responsibility. Darius used his position and the attention generated by his experience not for personal vengeance, but to create protection for others who lack his advantages. His story reminds us that justice is both a personal journey and a collective responsibility, and that even our most painful experiences can become doorways to our greatest purpose. Have you or someone you know experienced racial profiling or discrimination? How did that experience change your perspective on justice in America? Share your reflections in the comments. If this story moved you or made you think differently about racism and policing, please hit like to help more people discover it. The conversation about racial justice only advances when we engage with difficult stories like this. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that expose injustice and celebrate transformation. And if you know someone who needs to understand that racism persists at every level of society, or someone who could be inspired by the dignity and courage of Darius Holloway, share this video with that person. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. Together we can build a more just world where everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve.